Right now, you are likely feeling the persistent, gritty exhaustion of someone who has spent the entire day, and perhaps many years trying to carve their own personality into a shape that finally feels acceptable to everyone else. You are carrying the weight of a sculptor's iron chisel in your pocket, constantly checking your own edges, smoothing your behavior, and rounding off the parts of yourself that feel too sharp, too loud, or too unpolished. It is a wearying performance, isn't it? The way you silently monitor your own voice, the way you curate your opinions before they even leave your lips, and the way you hold your breath, waiting for the invisible audience of your life to signal that you are, at last, finished enough to be loved. You are standing in the sun-drenched, dusty workshop of your own mind, the ringing sound of metal on stone echoing in your ears. Yet the statue you are trying to create feels perpetually incomplete, perpetually rough, and perpetually at risk of being seen as flawed. The room you are in is dim, and the only light is the soft amber glow of a street lamp filtering through the heavy curtains, casting long, still shadows across the floor. The air smells faintly of rain on dry, sun-baked earth, a scent that brings with it the memory of things that grow without needing to be directed or forced. Tonight we will set aside that heavy iron chisel. You do not have to refine your nature, and you do not need to be a finished work of art to deserve the quiet. You are not broken, and the parts of you that you have been trying to polish away are not errors. They are simply the natural, unrefined grain of your own existence. Tonight, we will not force your mind to be silent, nor will we try to defeat the impulse to perform. We will simply learn how to lay the tool down, step away from the workbench, and sit for a while as an uncarved stone, perfectly resting in the cool, honest dark. There is a strange, quiet paradox at the heart of this constant refining. The more you try to carve yourself into a shape you believe will be loved, the more hollow and brittle you become. We often assume that our true nature is a rough draft that must be painstakingly improved through constant self-criticism. We believe that if we can just smooth out our eccentricities, tone down our natural rhythms, and fit ourselves into the rigid mold of expectation, we will finally find safety and belonging. Yet, the Buddhist insight offered to the weary soul is quite different. Wisdom is not the attainment of a perfect, polished form. It is the courageous act of accepting your natural grain. The suffering you experience does not come from the fact that you are unfinished. It comes from the exhausting, lifelong belief that you have to be something else. If it feels right, take a slow, gentle breath, and as you do, imagine the sensation of your hands finally letting go of that cold, metallic tool. Feel the sudden, sweet release in your palms, the way your fingers unfurl, no longer grasping at the hard edges of your own identity. You are stepping out of the dusty, stifling heat of the workshop and into a quiet, moonlit courtyard where nothing is expected of you. You do not have to be a statue. You do not have to be a masterpiece. You only have to be the person who is finally arriving in the sanctuary of their own presence. You are safe enough to soften. You are safe enough to let the dust settle on your shoulders, undisturbed and unobserved. You do not have to solve your whole life tonight. You only have to be the one who is here, breathing in the scent of the cooling earth, letting the heavy iron burden fall away into the shadows. Maybe you have felt this way for a long time, that if you ever stopped fixing your personality, the people around you would see the raw, unrefined material underneath and turn away. You have been treating yourself as a problem to be solved, rather than a living, breathing reality to be experienced. You think that by anticipating the critiques of others and editing yourself in advance, you are staying ahead of the potential hurt. But all this editing is doing is keeping you perpetually exhausted, and it is keeping you from the very thing you are seeking: the freedom to exist without the need for constant external approval. The truth is, you are far more beautiful in your natural, unedited state than you could ever be in the rigid, idealized shape you are trying to force upon yourself. You are not required to be enlightened or perfectly settled tonight. You are not required to have discovered the final form of your existence before you are permitted to close your eyes. You are only asked to notice the habit of the chisel, that small, sharp urge to critique how you are resting, how you are breathing, or how you are feeling. When you notice that urge, you do not need to be ashamed of it. It is just an old tool you have been carrying for so long that it has become part of your grip. You can just notice the weight of it, acknowledge how much effort it took to hold it, and then, with profound gentleness, let it rest on the floor. You are the space that holds the stone, not the force that strikes it. Take another slow, deep breath, and notice how the air moves through you, filling the parts of you that have felt cramped and constrained. There is no need for you to be anyone other than who you are in this very second. Your breath does not require your permission to be rhythmic, and your heart does not require your editing to keep you alive. There is a deep, ancient intelligence at work in your own being, one that knows exactly how to exist without needing to be carved into a specific form. You can lean into that intelligence tonight. You can trust that the forces which hold the mountains and move the tides are also the forces that hold you, even when you feel as though you are just a rough, unshaped block of stone. You are held by reality, and reality is far more porous, far more forgiving, and far more accepting than the rigid ideas you have held about your own worth. You might be worried that if you drop the chisel, you will lose your sense of self, that you will become a formless, shapeless mess that no one will recognize. But this is the fear of the sculptor, not the stone. The stone knows exactly what it is, even if it has never been touched by a tool. The stone is solid, it is enduring, and it is perfectly content to exist in the rain, in the sun, and in the quiet of the night, without ever needing to look like something else. You are that stone. You have always been that stone. You do not need to look like a statue to be worthy of the garden. In a moment, we will step into a story of a sculptor who traveled for years, searching for the perfect shape to carve into his life, only to find that he had spent his entire existence destroying the very thing he was trying to reveal. This story may feel significant, not because you have heard it before, but because you have lived the struggle of trying to edit your own spirit into a state of acceptability. It is the beginning of a shift, a way to see the chisel in your own mind and wonder what might happen if you were to simply let the iron rest, just for this evening. The darkness is not a void, it is the soft, welcoming bed of your own inner courtyard, where you can finally be unburdened. And tonight, we are letting the dust of your performance settle into the deep, restorative shade of the night. You are doing well. Just be here in this breath, in this quiet, with nowhere else to go and nothing left to prove. And perhaps this is where the teaching begins to touch your own heart, in the realization that you are not the sculptor who needs to improve the world, but the stone that is already whole, waiting for the weather to reveal the truth of your own, honest grain. In a bustling city where the noise of the streets rarely faded, even after the sun went down, there lived a master sculptor named Elian. Elian was known throughout the province for his ability to transform rough, unyielding blocks of sandstone into figures of such grace that they seemed to breathe. Yet, despite his renown, Elian lived in a state of constant, quiet agitation. He believed that his own personality was merely a rough draft, a clumsy and unrefined block of stone that required constant, vigorous carving. Every morning he would stand before his mirror and treat his own face and habits with the same critical intensity he applied to his art. If he felt a moment of impatience, he imagined he was hacking away a jagged edge. If he felt a flicker of insecurity, he mentally scraped at the surface of his spirit, trying to smooth it into something more palatable, more impressive, and more permanent. His workshop was filled with the fine, choking dust of sandstone, a gray powder that settled into the creases of his clothing and the lines of his palms. He possessed a heavy iron chisel, an heirloom passed down through generations of master carvers, and he used it not only on his stones but on his own sense of self. He believed that if he could just carve away enough of his defects, his hesitations, his quiet fears, his moments of melancholy, he would eventually reveal a masterpiece that the world would finally find worthy of deep and lasting love. He was exhausted, but he was also terrified to stop. He feared that if he ceased his carving for even a single hour, the world would see the unformed, dusty reality of the man beneath the art. One sweltering afternoon, an old nun named Sora, who tended the wild, neglected gardens at the edge of the city, visited his workshop. She did not speak as she entered. She simply walked among the statues, her wooden sandals clicking softly against the flagstone floor. She paused before a half-finished sculpture of a seated figure. The stone was scarred, pitted with the marks of the chisel, and looked as though it was struggling to emerge from the block. Elian, wiping the white dust from his brow, offered a weary explanation. "This one is difficult," he said, his voice strained. "The stone has a strange, stubborn grain. I have spent weeks trying to force it into a more graceful curve, but every time I strike the iron, I feel as though I am fighting the very material itself. I am afraid it will never be the masterpiece I envisioned." Sora leaned in close. Her eyes clouded, but her presence strikingly clear. She reached out and touched the rough, unpolished side of the block, her fingers tracing the jagged, natural textures that Elian had been working so hard to excise. She then reached into the folds of her robe and produced a simple, square piece of damp gray linen cloth. She did not speak. She simply handed the cloth to him and motioned for him to set down the heavy iron chisel. Elian hesitated. The tool was the only thing that gave him a sense of purpose. Without it, he felt aimless, unfinished, and exposed. But seeing the expectant, patient stillness in Sora's face, he felt a strange, sudden permission to release the weight. He laid the chisel on his workbench, and the silence in the room seemed to deepen, as if the space itself were exhaling. Sora took the linen cloth and dipped it into a bowl of water, then pressed it firmly against the rough stone. She began to wipe away the layers of dust, not with the harsh, predatory motion of the chisel, but with a slow, circular, rhythmic motion that felt more like a caress than a correction. As the dust cleared, the natural grain of the stone began to emerge. It was not the perfect, idealized shape Elian had been trying to impose. It was something entirely different, a pattern of swirls and deep, earthy veins that held a beauty the sculptor had been too busy attacking to notice. "Look," the nun said, her voice like the shifting of dry leaves. "You have been treating the stone as an enemy to be conquered, but the stone is not your enemy. It is the very foundation of your form. You have been trying to carve a dream, but you have forgotten to reveal the reality." Elian watched as the water darkened the grain, turning the dull gray into a rich, complex landscape of color and shadow. He felt a sudden, sharp ache in his chest, a recognition that he had spent his entire adult life trying to erase the very characteristics that made him authentic. He looked at his own hands, calloused and gray with dust, and then at the nun. "But if I stop carving," he whispered, "who will I be? If I do not refine my edges, who will find me worthy of staying?" Sora picked up the iron chisel and placed it gently in Elian's hands, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. "The chisel is not for destroying what is natural," she said. "It is for clearing away only what obscures the heart. You have been carving until there is nothing left but your own anxiety. You have been striking the stone so often that you have forgotten how to listen to the sound it makes when it is truly allowed to exist. Do not carve to become someone else. Simply reveal the grain that has been there since the beginning." She turned and left the workshop, leaving Elian standing in the middle of the settling dust. He felt a profound, heavy silence fill the room, a silence that no longer felt like a demand for output, but like an invitation to exist. He looked at the half-finished statue, and for the first time he did not see a project that needed fixing. He saw a shape that was already present, already beautiful in its raw, unpolished form. He stood for a long time, not moving, not carving, just breathing in the scent of the wet stone and the cooling air. He did not feel magically transformed, nor did his exhaustion disappear instantly, but he did feel a subtle, tectonic shift in his own spirit. He realized he had been holding his breath for decades, waiting for the sculpture to be finished so that he could finally start living. The transformation was quiet. He did not throw his tools away, but he did stop using them as a way to punish his own existence. When he felt the urge to critique a mistake or to worry about the impression he was making, he would return to the workbench, pick up the damp linen cloth, and practice the rhythm of cleaning the dust. He learned that there was a great hidden dignity in the parts of himself he had previously called rough. He found that he could be a sculptor who honored the grain rather than one who demanded a miracle of form. The work of the studio continued, but it was no longer a battle. It was a partnership with the stone, and in that partnership, the man himself began to soften, to breathe, and to eventually deeply rest. This is the quiet truth at the center of your own life. You have been holding the chisel of your own self-judgment for so long that you have forgotten what it feels like to be unedited, unrefined, and entirely sufficient. You have spent your energy trying to smooth away the parts of your personality that you believe are flawed, assuming that if you could just get the surface right, the rest of your life would finally be calm. But you are not a mistake that needs to be hacked away. You are the stone, and the grain of your life, your history, your quirks, your hesitations, and your honest, messy humanity is the very beauty that the world is waiting for. You do not need to be a finished masterpiece to deserve the shade of this evening. You only need to be the person who is finally ready to set the chisel down, to let the dust settle on your shoulders, and to understand that you are already, fundamentally, a whole and valid reality. Maybe you are afraid that if you stop improving yourself, you will become stagnant or that you will lose your way. But look at the garden of your own spirit. Nothing in nature grows because it is constantly being hacked at. It grows because it is given the space to unfold according to its own natural intelligence. You are not a construction project, you are a living, breathing existence that is already in motion. You don't have to manage the trajectory of your own personality. Like a project manager overseeing a site, you can trust that the same force that guides the stone to hold its shape also guides you to find your own path. If only you stop trying to strike at yourself for being who you are. As you sit in this stillness, let the image of the workshop fade into the cool, dark comfort of your own room. The dust is settling, the ringing of the iron on stone is coming to a complete and perfect rest, and you are no longer the one who has to strike, to carve, or to refine. You are the one who is finally witnessing the truth of your own unedited presence. If you feel the old habit of self-criticism rising, the phantom urge to reach for the tool and start correcting your own thoughts, gently notice the urge. Name it as the sculptor's reflex, and then let it pass like a soft shadow over the wall. You do not need to follow it. You do not need to agree with it. You only need to be the one who is here, breathing, resting, and letting the work of the night be simply the work of being. You are doing perfectly well simply by being here, simply by listening, and simply by choosing to stop the endless, exhausting carving of your own spirit. And perhaps this is where the teaching begins to touch your own heart in the quiet realization that you are not the sculptor who needs to improve your life, but the stone that is already whole, waiting for the weather to reveal the truth of your own honest grain. The heavy iron chisel Elian carried represents the architecture of your own inner life, specifically the way you attempt to resolve the ache of being human by editing the raw material of your personality until it fits a shape you believe will finally be safe. This story is not telling us that our lives should be empty of effort, nor is it suggesting that we should somehow become indifferent to the ways we grow. It is showing us something much quieter and more essential. The realization that the exhaustion you feel is rarely caused by the natural state of your spirit, but by the frantic, ceaseless labor of trying to carve a future that refuses to be constrained by our corrections. When Elian stood in his dusty workshop, his suffering was not in the existence of his longing or the difficulty of his craft. It was in his desperate internal mandate to ensure that he looked like a finished masterpiece before he was allowed to feel at peace. That is the first experience of being human, encountering the unpredictable, raw, and unrefined nature of the self. Your personality, your history, and your quirks are simply the raw material of existence, radiant in their own honest way, and entirely indifferent to our need for a neat account of our worthiness. However, the suffering that kept Elian trapped in his studio was a secondary layer altogether. It was the layer he constructed as a frantic defense against his own perceived inadequacy. We add this layer because we are terrified that if we stop carving, if we stop demanding an explanation for our perceived flaws, we will lose the very essence of who we are. We believe that we are the architects of our own acceptability, and that if we ever relax our focus on the chisel, the chaos of our true nature will leave us exposed to the judgment of others. We become so busy managing the records of our improvements that we lose contact with the very thing that makes life habitable, the capacity to inhabit a grain that does not need to be forced. Buddhist wisdom helps us recognize that we are usually far more exhausted by this secondary labor of refinement than by the actual realities of our day. What the old nun Sora showed Elian was that his sanctuary was not a prize to be seen through a perfect statue, or a truth to be derived from the dust. It was the space that was already present beneath the chipping. He had been trying to build his life out of ideals, assuming that if the edges were smooth enough and the documentation of his perfection was thorough enough, he could finally find rest. But ideals are a porous and brittle material. They do not anchor the soul. They only highlight the hunger of the sculptor. You do the same when you believe that you must present a perfectly curated version of yourself to the world, or when you insist on constantly replaying your past to see if you have finally found the logical error that explains your suffering. We think that by shielding our awareness with a wall of edits, we are protecting our dignity, but we are actually creating a lonely, isolated workshop of our own making. This is what it means to stop adding a second wound to the first. We are so often our own most rigid editors, standing at the edge of our own lives with white-knuckled intensity, trying to prevent any unjust feeling or unexplained quirk from being accepted without a cross-examination. We tell ourselves that if we feel anxious, we must have failed to polish away our nervousness. If we feel sadness, we must have been careless with our control. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to be alive. The beauty of a human life is found in its capacity to hold everything: the light, the darkness, the clarity, and the confusion, without needing to categorize or exclude any of it. You do not need to be a perfectly finished monument to be worthy of belonging. You are, and always have been, the stone that allows the growth to occur. Consider the energy you spend arguing with the trajectory of your days, or the mental rituals you conduct to ensure you are consistently refined for the next uncertain event. You are using your current vitality, your present moment awareness, to curate a narrative that no one else is actually requiring you to hold. You are trying to live in a perpetual state of deduction, shielding yourself from the very life you are meant to inhabit. When you catch yourself doing this, try to see it as the act of a traveler who is so frightened of their own skin that they refuse to realize their nature is already solid. You are so busy mourning the loss of a perfectly curated future that you are failing to notice the warmth of the sun falling across your own unedited hands. This is not about being reckless or careless with your growth. It is about understanding that the quality of your presence depends not on the accuracy of your chisel, but on your willingness to be here, in the midst of your own courtyard, without the armor of the old edits. The mind, in its search for security, desperately wants the world to be composed of quiet, logical sequences. It thinks that if it can just manage the refinement, it will finally be safe from the pain of being surprised or the pain of being overwhelmed. But true resilience is not a product of constant improvement. It is a product of inclusion. We connect with ourselves and others not because we have successfully solved the mystery of our own faults, but because we are real enough to host the whole experience. When we allow ourselves to acknowledge that the night is vast, even if we are resting in the courtyard, we invite our spirits to move into the new air. We break the cycle of exhaustion by daring to exist in the space where the tool has been set aside. You do not need to be a catalog of reasons to be present. You only need to be the person who is currently sitting, breathing, and looking out from the depth of your own reality. This teaching is meant to be a release from the exhausting work of maintaining your own defenses. You have been holding the heavy iron of your own expectations, trying to prevent any part of your story that feels too raw or too heavy from being accepted as it is. And it is a labor that yields nothing but a thinner, more brittle sense of self. Your soul is not a project that needs to be finished. It is the sanctuary where the life occurs. When you look at your own restlessness with compassion, you are not condoning your suffering, and you are not pretending the road was easy. You are simply choosing to honor the totality of your own life, including the moments that didn't go according to the pattern. As you reflect on this, notice where the tension sits in your body. Does it gather in the tightness of your jaw when you think of the parts of you that you feel you must monitor to keep yourself acceptable? Does it sink into your neck like a heavy, unseen weight of responsibility for things you cannot change? This is the physical sign that you are still trying to hold the iron against your own skin. You are bracing yourself against the reality of your own human experience. If it feels right, take a slow, deep breath and consciously let the muscles release. You are not performing for a crowd tonight. You are not carving for a judge. You are simply breathing in the quiet of this room, acknowledging that the experiences you have lived, even if they were difficult, even if they were filled with the echoes of your own monitoring, have brought you to this place. And this place is safe. You have done nothing wrong by being a person who has lived, learned, and occasionally felt the burden of wanting more predictability than the world was willing to provide. The capacity to witness your own mind with kindness is the most radical form of discipline you will ever practice. It is not an invitation to be dismissive or to ignore your own needs. It is an invitation to be honest. When you are not busy hiding your inner courtyard from yourself, you are free to feel the warmth of your own center. When you are not busy managing the record of your improvements, you are free to hear the sound of the rain or the rhythm of your own pulse. You are free to take your hand off the iron and see the simplicity of the truth, rather than the complexity of the interpretation. This is the difference between a life lived in fear of being discovered as incomplete and a life lived in the comfort of being at home. You do not have to reach any particular conclusion about your identity tonight. You do not need to label your year as successful or broken. You only need to notice the space that is open before you, the space where the rest is calling, and that space is wide, and it is welcoming, and it is entirely unburdened by the expectations that governed your afternoon. You are not the monument, and you are not the sculptor in the workshop. You are the one who is beneath it all. And you are the one who has the freedom to decide that, for now, it is safe to let the chisel rest if you do not feel like shaping anything anymore. This is the profound, quiet power of the present moment. It is always a sanctuary, even when the workshop is cluttered with the dust of the day. If you feel the urge to tighten your grip, if you feel the old familiar rhythm of the sculptor pulling at your awareness, simply name it. Just say, I am trying to carve again. Say it with gentleness, as if you were speaking to a companion who is afraid to be seen without their tools. You do not need to fight the doubt, and you do not need to agree with the requirement to remain vigilant. You can just notice the urge, hold it in your awareness, and know that the courtyard is already real, and the evening is as it needs to be. You are moving into a deeper, slower rhythm now, one where the urgency of the edits begins to fade into the steady, predictable heartbeat of the present. There is nowhere else to be, and there is no standard you must meet before you are permitted to let the tool go. You are doing perfectly well, simply by being here, simply by listening, and simply by choosing to stop the endless, exhausting carving of your own spirit. And perhaps this is where the teaching begins to touch your own heart, in the quiet realization that you are not the sculptor who needs to improve the stone, but the stone that is already whole, waiting for the weather to reveal the truth of your own honest grain. If it feels right, allow your eyelids to settle into a soft, quiet stillness, and let the room around you fade into the periphery of your awareness. We are not here to hack away at your edges, or to transform your personality into a monument for someone else to admire. We are here to sit with the sandstone of your own life, to breathe into the texture of your own grain, and to finally feel the cool, damp weight of the earth beneath your hands. You do not need to be a sculptor tonight. You do not need to be a master of form or a keeper of perfection. You only need to be the one who is finally willing to set down the heavy iron, let the dust settle where it may, and rest in the honest, tactile quiet of your own body. Take a slow, gentle breath, and as you do, imagine the sensation of unscrewing your fingers from the handle of that cold, metallic chisel. Feel the weight of the iron in your palms. It is dense, rigid, and sharp, a symbol of all the times you have struck at your own spirit to make it fit a shape it was never meant to hold. As you exhale, imagine setting that tool down on the flagstone floor of your inner workshop. You are not discarding it in anger. You are simply allowing it to rest. You are stepping back from the workbench, away from the gray, choking clouds of dust, and letting your awareness drift down toward the courtyard you have ignored while you were busy trying to improve your own existence. Feel your shoulders broaden and release, the tension that has been held in your neck beginning to thaw, as if the sharp, biting chill of self-critique is being replaced by the warm, still air of a moonlit garden. Observe the space between your thoughts, not as a gap that needs to be filled with more data or more polish, but as the grain of your own inner stone. Perhaps a thought arises, whispering a list of things you have not yet smoothed over, or a concern about how you might be perceived by the world tomorrow. When you notice this movement, you do not need to follow it. You do not need to pick up the chisel and begin carving. Simply acknowledge the arrival of the concern. Name it gently as the sculptor's reflex, and visualize yourself placing that worry onto the workbench, like a pile of discarded dust. You are not suppressing the anxiety, you are simply changing its location. You are moving it from the active, striking center of your life to the quiet, inactive floor of your workshop. Notice the physical sensation of that release. When you stop trying to carve away the parts of yourself you find too much, where does your energy go? It returns to your center. It returns to the steady rhythmic rise and fall of your chest. Feel the warmth in your hands as you rest them on your own body. This warmth is the most reliable grain you will ever find. It is the proof that you are here, that you are real, and that you are living in a reality that is far more tactile than any statue could ever describe. If a feeling of restlessness persists, a prickle of worry about what happens, if you stop fixing yourself, let that feeling be seen. You might imagine that sensation as a jagged, rough edge on your own spirit. It is a part of your reality, and it doesn't need to be hacked away. It only needs to be acknowledged. You can sit with it, breathe into the space around it, and notice how it loses its sharp, urgent edge when you stop trying to use it as a project. Even noticing that you are restless is an act of profound wisdom. That small moment of recognition where you realize, I am trying to carve again, is the very moment the path begins to clear. It is the moment you stop being the sculptor who judges the stone and start being the witness to the life that is already there. There is no need for catharsis, and there is no need for a sudden, dramatic breakthrough. The stone does not grow because you demand it to. It exists because you provide the space, the breath, and the steady, quiet patience of your presence. You are doing perfectly well, simply by being the witness to your own unedited state tonight. If it feels right, you might visualize yourself taking the damp linen cloth that Sora left for you. You don't need to do any heavy labor right now. The work of the night is not production, but permission. Imagine yourself walking through the workshop of your own spirit, noticing the layers of dust you have accumulated from years of self-reproach. You don't have to clean every corner. You only need to touch one patch of stone, recognize its natural pattern, and breathe. Feel the weight of the soft, wet cloth in your hand. It is made of simple fibers, humble and cool. It connects you to the reality of the material. Let your hand rest on the cloth, feeling the dampness against your skin. And notice how that simple connection to a physical texture pulls your awareness out of the workshop and down into the reality of the room. If you find yourself drifting back to the workbench, back to the desire to strike, to correct, to refine, or to defend, that is perfectly acceptable. The mind is a sculptor who has held the iron for a long time. It does not know how to stop immediately. You can treat that desire with the same kindness you would show a tired apprentice who is afraid to be seen without their tools. You don't need to scold the apprentice. You don't need to force them to sit in the courtyard before they are ready. You can just notice the urge, acknowledge the fear that drives it, and then gently turn your head back toward the silence. Breathe, soften, and return. The courtyard is patient. The stone is waiting. It is not going anywhere. Feel the support of the bed beneath you, the way the floor of your room is holding the structure of your life, even while you are resting. You are not a masterpiece in the making, you are a whole, existing reality. And being whole is not a weakness, it is the very foundation of your capacity to rest. You can let the chisel go. You can let the stone be. You can let the night be exactly as it is, without your permission or your analysis. You are anchored here, rooted and real. And there is no project left to finish. Observe the way your breath becomes quieter, the way the rhythm of your heart slows to match the stillness of the room. This is the natural outcome of lowering the iron. This is what happens when you stop trying to force your personality into a statue and start honoring the immediate. You are becoming a person of the earth, a person of the grain, a person who understands that the only destiny that matters is the one you are inhabiting right now, in this breath. In this moment of quiet, in this safe, dark, and perfectly sufficient space. If you are feeling a lingering heaviness, do not be afraid. The dust of the workshop is supposed to settle. That is where the quiet is. That is where the truth finds its purchase. You don't need to lighten your heart by force. You only need to ground it in the truth of your own experience. Whatever you are carrying, the shame, the self-critique, the memory of trying to be enough, let it rest on the workbench. Let it dissolve into the floor. The courtyard is vast enough to hold your history, your confusion, and your hope, and it will turn all of it into the very substance that sustains your rest. You are doing perfectly well, and the work of the night is almost done. Just keep breathing, keep sensing the ground, and keep letting go of the iron. The world will continue to change without you, and you at last are free to rest in the sanctuary of your own life. In the high, desolate reaches of the northern mountains, where the winter storms howl with a ferocity that can shatter glass, there lived a young monk named Koi. Koi had spent many years in his monastery, believing that the way to true peace was to create a mind as still as a frozen pond. He was obsessed with the practice of silence, viewing every sound in his monastery as a failure of his own concentration. If a floorboard creaked, if a fellow monk coughed during meditation, or if the wind whistled through the eaves, Koi would tighten his jaw, clench his hands, and brace himself against the intrusion. He lived his days in a state of constant, low-level warfare against his own environment, certain that if he could just keep the world quiet enough, he would finally be able to touch the face of enlightenment. His teacher was an elderly monk who lived in a small, remote cabin near an echoing, ancient well. This well was notorious in the valley because it didn't just hold water, it held sound. Because of the unique shape of the stone masonry, even the softest whisper dropped into the well would return to the speaker, amplified and distorted. Moments later, for years, the young monk had avoided this well, convinced that it was a place of distraction. But one evening, when the mountain air was particularly fierce and the wind was wailing through the valley, the teacher called Koi to the well. He handed the young man a heavy, smooth stone and pointed toward the dark, yawning mouth of the water source. "Drop the stone," the teacher said, "and listen to the echo." Koi hesitated, his hand trembling as he reached toward the opening. He knew that the sound would return to him, and he had spent his life training himself to despise unwanted noise. He dropped the stone. A hollow, heavy thud resounded deep in the earth, and a few moments later, the echo returned, sharp and jarring, bouncing off the damp walls and piercing the stillness of the mountain air. Koi instinctively flinched, his shoulders pulling toward his ears, his teeth grinding together as the sound hit him. He reached out as if to catch the echo in the air, trying to push it back into the darkness. The teacher did not move. He simply watched the young monk struggle again. He said, "Drop another." Koi dropped a second stone and then a third. Each time the echo returned, and each time Koi braced himself, fighting the sound, trying to suppress the ripple it caused in his composure. His face was flushed with the exertion of his resistance. He felt the familiar, burning frustration of the merchant, the same irritation he felt when the monastery was not perfectly silent. He turned to his teacher, his voice strained. "Master, why must I endure this? The echo is a poison to my meditation. It is a disturbance that does not belong in the silence of the mountain." The old man reached down and picked up a handful of dry needles from a pine tree. He didn't throw them into the well. He simply held them in his palm and let them fall into the empty space between them. The needles fluttered to the ground, landing with a sound so faint it was barely audible. Then he looked at Koi. "You are fighting the echo because you believe you are the owner of the silence," he said softly. "But the well does not belong to you, and the sound does not belong to the well. The echo is not a poison, it is a law of the mountain. It returns because the well is deep and because the stone has weight. The only reason the echo feels like a failure to you is because you have convinced yourself that your meditation must be a place where nothing ever happens." Koi stood by the well, his heart hammering against his ribs. The realization hit him with the weight of the stone he had just dropped. He had been so focused on the return of the sound that he had completely ignored the depth of the well. He had been so intent on keeping his mind frozen that he had missed the fact that a living mind, like a deep well, is designed to hold everything: the noise, the echo, the wind, and the silence. He looked down into the black water. He realized that the echo was not a reflection of his inadequacy. It was a testament to the depth of the place where he lived. He picked up one final stone. This time, he didn't tense his jaw. He didn't brace his shoulders. He didn't prepare to fight the return of the sound. He held the stone for a moment, feeling its cool, rough surface, and then he let it go. He watched it fall. He heard the thud, and when the echo came back, louder and sharper than before, Koi simply listened. He didn't follow the sound with his mind. He didn't name it as a disturbance. He didn't label it as a failure. He just let the sound be a sound and let the space be a space. He breathed into the echo, feeling it move through his body like a wave moving through the ocean. And then he watched as it faded back into the absolute quiet of the night. A strange, subtle shift occurred in that moment. Koi did not become a saint. He did not gain the power to turn the world into a perfectly silent void. But he did stop holding his breath. He stopped treating the sounds of the world as personal attacks on his own character. When he returned to the monastery the next day, the floorboards still creaked, the other monks still coughed, the wind still wailed, but Koi no longer met these sounds with a clenched fist. He met them with the depth of the well. He found that when he stopped fighting the echo lost its power to disrupt him. It became just one more part of the landscape, like the trees, the snow, or the stars. The transformation was small, almost invisible to anyone watching from the outside. He still practiced silence, but it was no longer a forced silence. It was a spacious, inclusive silence that could hold 1,000 noises without breaking. He learned that the deepest form of peace isn't found by escaping the noise, but by being deep enough to hold it. And whenever he felt the familiar urge to brace himself against the world, he would simply pause, remember the depth of the well, and breathe until the tension in his hands finally dissolved. He was no longer the merchant guarding the gate, he was the well, and the well did not fear the sound. This shift in how you relate to your own suffering is the true work of the evening. You have spent so long bracing yourself against the echoes of your own thoughts, treating every internal sound like an intruder that must be evicted. You have turned your mind into a battlefield, constantly monitoring for the slightest hint of noise so you can strike it down with your own self-judgment. But what if you were to treat yourself not as a guard of a crumbling fort, but as the deep well that holds the mountain? What if the anxiety, the overthinking, and the persistent, nagging memories are just stones you are dropping into the depth of your own awareness? The stones have weight. Yes, they make a sound when they hit the bottom, but they do not change the nature of the water. You are the depth. You are the space that allows the sound to be heard, and then inevitably allows it to fade. You do not need to be afraid of the echo. You do not need to be afraid of the noise. You only need to remember that you are the space that holds it all. As you lie here tonight, allow your own internal echoes to resonate without your interference. If a memory of a conflict arises, let it sound. If a worry about tomorrow echoes through your chest, let it sound. You do not need to catch the echo. You do not need to push it back. You can just sit with the depth, knowing that you are vast enough and quiet enough to be the sanctuary for every single thing that passes through you. The transformation you are seeking is not a destination where no thoughts ever arise. It is the soft, gentle realization that you are the one observing the thoughts. You are the one who is deep and steady and ancient. When you feel the familiar tension in your shoulders, use that as a reminder to deepen your own inner architecture. Drop the stone, listen to the sound, and then let it go. You are doing perfectly well. You are learning to inhabit the depth of your own being. And in that depth, there is no noise that can truly harm you. There is only the silence, the echo, and the vast, peaceful potential of the well. And in this vastness, you are finally free to stop defending your own mind and start resting in the sanctuary you have been carrying within you all along. When we look beneath the surface of your exhaustion, it becomes evident that the heaviness you carry is not the weight of your own nature, but the rigid, unrelenting labor of your own resistance. You have spent so long believing that if you could just apply enough pressure, if you could just chip away at your flaws with sufficient force, you would finally arrive at a version of yourself that is safe from rejection. This is the mechanism of control, the desperate, anxious fantasy that if you are the one holding the chisel, you can dictate how the world perceives the stone. You judge your own impulses, you critique your own feelings, and you analyze your own character as if it were a faulty construction project that has gone wrong. But this is the work of a sculptor who has forgotten that their own hands are also part of the stone. When you direct your own judgment towards yourself, you are not improving the material, you are merely fracturing the piece that was already there. You have been trying to fix the self through shame, believing that if you are harsh enough with your own edges, you will become worthy of the love you have been seeking. But shame is a cold, metallic tool that does not reveal the grain, it only covers the surface in a thick, suffocating layer of gray dust. The deepest mechanism of your suffering is the habit of turning the original, unavoidable pain of life into a permanent identity. Buddhist wisdom describes this as the cycle of the two arrows. The first arrow is the reality of your life, the moments when things do not go as planned, the times you feel misunderstood, the inevitable losses, and the inherent loneliness of being a separate, changing person in an unpredictable world. This first arrow is the condition of being alive. It is the cold winter, the dry summer, and the natural weathering of the stone. We cannot stop the first arrow from landing. Life is, by its very nature, a series of shifts, surprises, and challenges that we did not choose and cannot fully command. To feel the impact of this, to feel hurt, to feel tired, to feel uncertain is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of your humanity. However, the second arrow, the one that causes the most profound, lingering exhaustion, is the one you fire at yourself the moment the first one lands. This second arrow is your resistance, your self-judgment, and your refusal to accept that you are currently wounded. It is the voice that says, "I shouldn't be feeling this way," or "If I were a better person, this wouldn't have happened," or "I must immediately fix this before someone sees." When you fire this second arrow, you are no longer dealing with the initial hurt. You are now struggling with the secondary injury of your own refusal to be human. You are taking a natural, temporary experience of pain and turning it into a chronic, heavy state of shame. You are trying to use your mind to battle reality. And because reality is far larger and more fluid than the mind, the battle will always result in a feeling of defeat. You are exhausting yourself by trying to maintain a narrative of perfection, when the truth of your life is one of constant, beautiful, and necessary change. Consider how often you rehearse the future or replay the past, trying to curate your own life to ensure that the sculpture of your personality remains unblemished. You are afraid of uncertainty, so you treat it like an enemy that must be anticipated and defeated through constant internal editing. You fear that if you are not currently in the process of fixing yourself, you are stagnant or worse, somehow unworthy of your place in the world. But this fear of uncertainty is not a form of wisdom, it is a cage. It is a way of holding your life at arm's length, so you don't have to experience the vulnerability of simply being. When you replay the past, you are trying to use the chisel to carve a different history, believing that if you just understand it differently, you will be safe. When you rehearse the future, you are trying to carve a future that is already set in stone, believing that if you just anticipate every angle, you will be invulnerable to surprise. But the stone of your life is not a fixed object, it is a living grain that requires the elements to reveal its true character. True resilience, and the inner peace you have been quietly searching for, is not found in the absence of difficulty. It is found in a fundamental shift in how you relate to that difficulty. Peace is the capacity to stand in the middle of your own life, with all its cracks, its rough patches, and its moments of genuine, raw uncertainty, and choose not to fire the second arrow. It is the ability to acknowledge, "Yes, I am hurting right now," without immediately tacking on the accusation that you are somehow wrong for doing so. When you stop feeding the second arrow, the original pain has a space in which to breathe. It stops being a permanent identity and starts being an event that is passing through you. You stop being the person who is the struggle and start being the person who hosts the struggle. This is the profound, quiet power of the awakened heart. It does not demand that life stop being difficult. It only demands that you stop making the difficulty your enemy. If you can notice the urge to control, name it with compassion. When you feel the need to seek approval, see it as the act of a sculptor who is tired of working in the dark and is just looking for a single light to guide the way. You don't have to hate yourself for wanting that light. You only need to see that the light you are seeking from others is already burning within the grain of your own existence. You are not a faulty block of stone that needs to be coerced into beauty. You are a complete, unfolding expression of the living earth. And your imperfections are not reasons for shame, they are the marks of your own unique path through the world. The suffering you have experienced because you thought you needed to be finished, perfect, or invulnerable is now beginning to lose its hold, because you are finally realizing that you were never the one who needed to be carved. You were always the stone that could hold the memory of the rain, the touch of the sun, and the deep, quiet silence of the night. The integration of this wisdom takes time, and you are not expected to change your entire way of being in a single evening. The practice is to observe your own mind with the same gentle, curious attention that the nun Sora gave to the stone. When you feel the tension of the chisel in your hands, simply take a breath, notice the pattern. Notice the way you are trying to shape reality to fit a mold that is too small for your actual life. And then choose not to strike. Choose to set the tool down. Choose to let the weight of your own expectations rest on the floor of the workshop. You are doing something incredibly courageous simply by allowing yourself to be unfinished. You are participating in the unfolding of your own reality in a way that is honest, fluid, and profoundly kind. As you sit in this quiet, allow the feeling of the need to be finished to dissipate into the dark, welcoming atmosphere of your room. You are not a project. You are a presence. You are not a draft that requires correction. You are a reality that is ready to be held. There is nothing about you that is inherently broken, and there is no part of your story that needs to be hacked away for you to deserve this rest. The dust of the workshop is clearing, and what remains is not a statue of perfection, but the simple, breathing truth of a person who is finally coming home to their own skin. You are held by the same life that moves the grain of the stone, and you can trust that life to take care of you, even when you have stopped trying to sculpt the outcome. You are doing well, and you are far more whole than your anxieties have ever been willing to admit. There is no urgency here, and there is no expectation to reach a final, perfect form tonight. Just breathe into the space you have cleared. Just let the iron stay where it is. You are finally, after all this time, safe enough to be exactly who you are, with all your beautiful, unpolished, and perfectly honest edges intact. The transition from the stillness of the workshop into the rapid, relentless rhythm of your everyday life is where the true narrative of your healing is actually written. It is easy to find a sense of clarity when you are listening to the story of a sculptor who finally stopped hacking away at his own spirit. But when you are caught in the middle of a Tuesday, staring at a screen while waiting for a response that refuses to arrive, the heavy iron of your own expectations often feels far more burdensome than it did in the quiet of the mountain. You might find yourself checking your phone for some kind of external reassurance, hoping that a single notification will settle the flutter in your chest and confirm that you are worthy, that you are remembered, that you are still a vital part of the world. When the reply does not come, you may feel your mind immediately beginning to reach for the chisel, trying to adjust the surface of your own worth, trying to find an explanation for the silence that makes you feel small or forgotten. In those moments of modern solitude, you are trying to force a shape onto the day that it refuses to take. Instead of following the thread of that panic, try taking one breath before you reach for the screen again, just one. That breath is not a solution to the silence, but it is a way of reclaiming your own agency. It is an act of recognizing that you can exist in this uncertainty without immediately needing to fill it with a defensive, weary performance of your own adequacy. Maybe you find yourself lying awake long after the house has gone quiet, replaying a conversation where you felt clumsy, exposed, or misunderstood. You are back in that moment, mentally reenacting your words, trying to imagine how you could have been sharper, more composed, or more impressive. You are attempting to fight a ghost from days ago, trying to change the trajectory of an event that has already settled into the earth. This is the habit of the sculptor who fears the dust. You believe that if you study the error long enough, you will prevent it from ever happening again. But this is the second arrow, the injury you inflict upon your own peace to make up for the limitation that already occurred. When you catch yourself doing this, try to visualize that memory not as a stain on your identity, but as a single rough spot on a stone that has already been weathered by time it happened. It is part of the landscape. You do not need to pull it out of the past and press it back into your current life to justify your worth. You do not need to discard the entire experience. You can simply acknowledge that the roughness occurred. Forgive yourself for being a person who is still learning to navigate the winds of time. And let your focus return to the texture of your sheets, the weight of your body, and the fact that you are safe in this room, right now. There is often a pervasive pressure to feel like you are behind in life, that others have mastered the art of being, while yours remains a series of revisions and crossed-out lines. You might feel the burden of performing your stability, of keeping your edges tight even when you are feeling hollow or fragile. You offer help to others, you smile through the fatigue, you maintain the appearance of a master of your own destiny. But inside, you feel the strain of holding up a narrative that you are terrified will be judged as empty. This is the exhaustion of the traveler who has become a statue. It is the effort of maintaining a version of yourself that is meant for a gallery, at the expense of the person who just needs to feel the cool, damp shadow of their own courtyard. You do not have to be the repository of every achievement. You are allowed to be the space around the experience. You are allowed to admit that you are tired, to say, "I do not have the grain figured out yet," or to simply step away from the carving for an evening. Your worth is not a transaction. It is not something you have to earn through your output, your charm, or the perfection of your composure. It is inherent, and it is here, whether you are productive or whether you are still. Consider the times you feel the sudden, sharp need to control a relationship, to force an outcome because you are terrified of losing the connection or being revealed as less than. You might find yourself over-explaining, apologizing for your presence, or checking in too often, all in an effort to keep the walls of the relationship from crumbling under the pressure of your own neediness. But when you pull a boundary too tight, you don't strengthen the connection, you make it brittle. You make it prone to snapping under the pressure of your own anxiety. Real connection is found in the spaces where there is no tension. It is found when you can allow the other person to be who they are, without needing them to fulfill a role in your internal ledger of security. You can care deeply without gripping the chisel so hard your hands bleed. You can offer love without making it a currency of validation. This requires a specific kind of courage, the courage to risk being seen without the display of your defenses, and the courage to trust that you are sick enough, even if the other person does not mirror your efforts exactly as you expected. You may also struggle with the feeling that you have not earned your rest, that if you aren't constantly solving, analyzing, or preparing for the next demand, you are being irresponsible. You might feel guilty for sitting in a quiet room without a task, or for closing your eyes before the day is perfectly in order. This is the belief that rest is a reward to be unlocked by your productivity, rather than a fundamental necessity of the living, breathing human form. You do not have to earn the right to exist. You do not have to prove your value to the world before you are allowed to close your eyes. When that guilt arises, treat it like a dry, dusty leaf that has blown into your courtyard. Acknowledge that the guilt is a habit, a voice from the workshop that equates survival with endless striking. You can choose to set it down. You can choose to rest simply because you are here. And the body, like the stone itself, requires seasons of stillness to remain resonant. It is helpful to remember that mindfulness is not an escape from these modern pressures. It is a way to inhabit them differently. A breath before you answer an email is not a waste of time. It is a form of wisdom that protects the integrity of your own spirit. Choosing not to engage in a toxic spiral of comparison when you see someone else's highlight reel on a screen is not weakness. It is a profound act of self-discipline. You are creating a boundary between the world's constant noise and your own internal sanctuary. Every time you consciously return to the present, you are choosing to walk the path without trying to turn it into a battlefield. You are saying, "I will meet the world when it arrives, but for now I am here in my own skin," and that is sufficient. Even in the smallest moments, the way you hold a cup of tea, the way you listen to the sound of the rain, the way you walk through a doorway, you can practice this. You do not need to leave your life to find the garden. The garden is the attention you bring to these moments. When you feel the familiar pull to worry, pause and ask yourself, is this worry helping me? Is it solving anything? Or is it just the rhythm of the traveler, striking at the stone for an image that hasn't arrived? If it is just the striking, then let it sit. You do not have to carry the burden of the iron tonight. You can step away, you can soften your jaw, and you can let the silence of the room be your guide. This does not mean the difficulties of your life will vanish. The responsibilities will still be there. The world will still be complex, and the path will remain demanding. But you will meet these things with a different spirit. You will meet them as someone who is rooted, someone who knows that their identity is not tied to the perfection of the form they can produce. You will meet them with the quiet, steady strength of a person who understands that the beauty of life is in the seasons, the rain, and the willingness to let the truth emerge in its own time. You are learning that you are not the builder of your own destiny. You are the one who gets to participate in the flow for a brief, precious span of time. And that is enough. It is more than enough. Stay with this feeling of lightness. The next moments are yours to simply inhabit, without trying to capture them or wall them into something they are not yet. You are doing perfectly well, and the night is finally holding you with a gentleness you are ready to receive. The workshop is behind you, the chisel is set aside, and you are finally entering the space where the noise is allowed to dissolve, unheeded, unmanaged, and perfectly at peace in the dark. The iron chisel is cold and motionless now, left behind in the dim, shadowed corners of the workshop, while you have safely wandered down into the rich, damp loam of your own courtyard. You do not need to carry the burden of the sculptor any longer. The stone, with its deep and silent grain, will continue to exist, but it no longer demands that you be its modifier or its critic. You have set down the heavy tool, you have stepped away from the dust, and you have finally allowed yourself to feel the solid, steady earth beneath your back. This room, this moment, and this breath are enough. The grain of your life does not ask you to strike it for validation. It only asks for your presence, your patience, and your willingness to let the truth of your own shape emerge in the quiet dark. Feel the softness of the air as it moves through the room, a gentle breeze that carries away the need to smooth, to shape, or to finish. Your limbs are growing heavy, sinking into the mattress like roots, finding their deepest purchase in the cool, still earth. There is a profound, quiet safety in this release, a realization that the ground was always there, waiting to hold you. Even when your mind was back at the workbench, lost in the sharp, biting chill of trying to be someone else, the work of being an editor of your own existence is finished for tonight. You are not a sculptor of monuments, but a witness to the living grain. And the grain requires nothing of you but your rest. Feel the tension draining from your jaw, the hard, clamped lines of the sculptor smoothing into the calm, untroubled face of one who has finally come home. Your hands are uncurled, your fingers are resting in the cradle of your palms, and your heart is beating with the slow, deliberate rhythm of the stone. This is the truth of your existence, not the frantic striking of the chisel, but the quiet, resonant pulse of the life that is breathing itself without your permission or your worry. Let the darkness of the room be a soft velvet cloak. Let the silence of the night be the sanctuary you have sought in the approval of others. You are anchored here, rooted and real, and there is no distance left to cross. Each breath is a slow, deepening invitation to let go of the last remnants of the iron tool. As you inhale, imagine the coolness of the courtyard air filling your lungs. And as you exhale, imagine the heat and the friction of your mental refining dissolving into the dark. You are becoming as still as a mountain ridge in twilight, waiting for the natural, unforced unfolding of the morning. There is no need to rush the revelation, and there is no need to fear the weather. The seasons will turn, the wind will pass, and you will be there, ready to inhabit the earth. But for now, you are simply the life that rests. You are the grain, you are the stone, and you are the quiet, dark space where everything is allowed to be exactly as it is, without being measured, without being carved, and without being solved. The iron is cold and silent, forgotten on the workbench. while you are warm, heavy, and sinking deeper into the restorative, dreamless calm of the world. There is a deep, ancient wisdom in this surrender. You are not disappearing into the void, you are returning to the source of your own integrity. The mind that worries, the mind that critiques, the mind that clings to the chisel, all of these are just visitors, passing shadows on the vast open wall of your awareness. You are the wall. You are the depth that holds the shadow, and you are the stillness that allows the night to be so remarkably, beautifully quiet. Nothing is broken. Nothing is missing. Nothing needs to be polished before you can close your eyes and drift into the soft velvet dark. You are simply a traveler who has reached the end of the long workshop, and the path has led you at last to the gate of your own courtyard. Let the door close behind you. Let the heavy iron instruments remain where they lay. Let the dust dissolve like mist in the moonlight. There is nothing left to shape, and there is nowhere left to prove. The courtyard is still. The night is deep. The earth is holding you, firm and patient, in the palm of its ancient hand. You can stop holding your breath. You can stop guarding the edges of your identity. You can stop the frantic, lonely work of being the one who must craft a masterpiece for the world to see. The world is only a backdrop, and the backdrop is only a dance, and the dance is not your responsibility. You are free to let the life unfold without your constant interference. You are free to let the night take you into its cool, protective center, where the only thing that matters is the rhythm of your own quiet heart. Drift down, deeper still, into the dark, rich loam of this piece. The chisel is gone. The workshop is silent. You are finally completely and deeply at home in your own unpolished stillness. If the person you were trying so hard to carve is already alive, in the silence you were trying so hard to smooth away, what would happen if you simply let the night hold you until you were ready to wake as yourself?